And welcome to Fox News Sunday Panel Plus with Bill Kristol, Joe Trippi, Karl Rove, and Juan Williams. As promised, round two. Juan, why is Karl wrong?
Well, Karl makes it out that somehow, you know, Romney is going to pay for all these tax cuts that are going to drive up the deficit. And it's just purely wrong. In fact, they have not, the Romney team has not laid out where these cuts would accrue. Just haven't done it.
Well, look. He says he's going to pay, but it's clear he has not laid out the specific loopholes, deductions that he would close the tax expenditures to pay for this dramatic 20% cut in all the tax rates. Does he need to do that?
Well, he needs to be directional about it. I do think right now is a time to be respectful. If you want to be a successful president, start thinking like a successful president now. So it's right for him to be respectful of the House Ways and Means Committee and Dave Camp and his people and say, look, this is my principle, and he's already assigned Greg Mankiw of Harvard and Glenn Hubbard of Columbia to work with House Ways and Means as an open line of communication. And I think it's right to push the Republicans in the House Ways and Means where this would have to start to say, I want you to be my partners. We've agreed on this principle. Now let's begin the process of defining.
But doesn't he run the risk? Because the failure to set these out allows the president, as he has, to say he's going to give these dramatic cuts, in tax cuts to the wealthy, and he's not paying for them. It's going to explode the deficit. And also on the spending side, he's calling for I forget how much it is, trillions of dollars in spending cuts, and he doesn't say what there is. So then Obama sits there and says to the Democrats, well, let's just take that across the board. That would mean 200,000 jobs here and this big a cut in the National Institutes of Health. I mean, he does raise some problems.
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think that the American people accept it. He needs to talk more about, here's my concept of tax reform, and the principles are probably enough for most of the American people. And he may need to pick out a couple of egregious things and say, why do you get to take your mortgage deduction up to $1 million on your second home, your vacation home? I mean, a couple of those suffice, but the principle will stand. It's better than the president who's got, I'm going to take care of it all with the Buffett rule, which will, quote, take care of our ability to deal with the debt and deficit for the coming decade.
You just didn't answer the question. I'm disappointed.
Yes, I did.
You did not. And the Buffett rule, listen, the president never says going to take care of everything.
Open up your ears, Wayne.
The Buffett rule is to symbolize the idea that everybody should share in the sacrifice needed to reform
Everybody
our
does.
system.
Everybody does.
What?
Everybody already does. In the form of paying taxes. And this says we will set a new principle that we will punish.
Is that right?
Let me finish,
Karl Rove is saying that the working-class Americans don't pay taxes?
Let Karl finish, and then I'll give you a chance.
Juan, this establishes a new principle that we will more heavily tax savings and investment at a time when the country needs to have more savings and investment, and we will do so in a way that will generate $47 billion over the next decade when the president wants to spend $47 trillion, which is 47,000 billions of dollars. It is not a real answer. And Romney has laid out a concept for comprehensive tax reform. The president has not. He's laid out a gimmick that can't even get a vote in the Democrat House, the Democrat Senate Finance Committee.
Juan, let me just ask you this question in response. I asked David Plouffe. I said, "Do you have anything else?" Because what he's basically saying is the Jobs Act that he had announced to Congress last September, a year ago, which, according to independent economists, would only create 250,000 jobs over 2 years, and they have nothing more.
No, they have a plan that is being obstructed by a totally obstructionist Republican majority in the House of Representatives. They can't get anything done. And I think he has to be very clear. Here are ideas that I think can ignite the economy.
You think his ideas, if they were all passed, would ignite the economy?
I think you have to give it a shot. I think clearly. And by the way, I will acknowledge that what is now considered to be toxic stimulus spending, right? Just, politically not saleable. Doesn't work in the marketplace. But did it, in fact, help us avoid the tragedy of a depression? I would argue it did. I would argue that if you look at GDP and other economic indicators, the stimulus, in fact, helped to prompt.
Let's have more of it. More deficit.
Improvement.
More spending.
No, but that's
it worked. It worked.
Okay,
we have 6% unemployment.
In the interest of fairness and balance, Mr. Kristol?
I'll say a word more about the Romney campaign and stay out of this petty partisan debate here to my left.
Mr. Statesman, Mr. Statesman.
No, I mean, look, I think Romney, I've said for 2 months, I think Mitt Romney has a very good chance to win the presidency, is likely to do so because at the end of the day, President Obama has not been a very successful president. But I was very struck by this Gallup poll this week that asked who do you blame mostly for the sad state of the economy. Bush was 68%, Romney 52. But what was most striking...
No, Obama 52.
Yeah, Obama 52. So people still blame President Bush more than President Obama because they think, hey, the huge financial crisis happened on President Bush's watch, and we could relitigate why that happened, but voters sort of have this simple-minded view that if he was president, he was president. Obama wasn't president yet. And what's most striking is that hasn't changed over the last year and a half. That's sort of locked in, which is good for President Obama. In other words, and Romney does bear that burden. It may be totally unfair, but he bears that burden, which is all the more reason I think he needs to have a forward-looking agenda. And I think people like me who just think the attack on Bush has gotten ridiculous underestimate how effective it could be out there in swing states among swing voters. That line that President Obama repeated about 5 times in that speech about Romney will just take us back to the Bush years, and how did the Bush years end? That is not, I think, an ineffective line. And the best way to counter it is not to relitigate the Bush years. Karl and I and others can do that on behalf of President Bush, but for Mitt Romney to say, here's my agenda going forward.
Well, and it's interesting, speaking of the agenda going forward, though, and I don't think it was just happenstance, Plouffe, in our interview, talked specifically about the fact that Romney is going to be with Boehner today, and this is a thing I think you're going to hear a lot. Romney will rubber stamp the House Republican agenda. You don't like those House Republicans, and their numbers are very low. You put in Romney, he'll just sign whatever they pass.
That's exactly right. But I think part of this discussion, the reason we're having it, and it seems so petty, is because people understand that these problems racked up over decades. This wasn't all George Bush's fault. Or Obama's. It started a long time ago. And Romney is not, the ideas he articulates are out of the past. They are keep passing extend tax cuts for the rich. I mean, there are these kinds of issues. If Obama can sort of focus people on the future, and look, we've been held up by Boehner and the Republicans from taking the steps that we need to take. We've done the best we can. We've created private sector jobs. We're moving forward. How do we go from here? That's how, and if Romney fails to project some positive forward thinking, it's going to be a problem for him. It's going to look like he's going backwards, plays into Obama's hands.
Thank you, panel. Everybody calm down now. Everybody ready to enjoy the rest of their Sunday?
Happy Father's Day.
Check in with us throughout the week. Let us know what you think of this conversation. Look for my Monday edition of Wallace Unplugged, which you can find right here at FoxNewsSunday.com. And we'll see you back here next Sunday.